I mean, I wonder when he became the nominated candidate for the Liberal Party of Canada. Others who have participated in this were told at different points that actually some projects were rejected because they did not meet the funding requirements. And they were told, actually in emails that we know because they were released by the whistleblower, by others at parliamentary committees, they were told, quote, they would help her find money from other government departments. And pretty soon after that, the former board chair's center, named after her, got $12 million from ACOA and the ISET program. So even in some situations where it was quite obvious that for conflict of interest reasons, a program could not get money, money wasn't given out through another fund. So 9 directors, according to the Auditor General, accounted for the 186 conflicts. 9 directors, 9 individuals appointed by the government, appointed by the cabinet to sit on this board and make decisions. And they made decisions. The sponsorship scandal, when I was Speaker, was around $40 million, as I remember it. And I'm sure with inflation adjustment, that's actually a bigger number now. But $40 million is still a lot of money. It's still an incredible amount of money for the taxpayer. We're talking close to $400 million in this particular case, a much, much bigger sum. So the minister said back in June that there would be new transparency rules or new transparency measures that would be introduced. And now the Liberal government is giving out money again. Not a single bit of that information is being made available anywhere on the new website. SDTC used to put out a quarterly report on every single company. And the new fund, whatever has been rolled into, it doesn't do that anymore. It's silent, it's hidden. There's no more information being given out. We're supposed to believe that it was only those 9 directors that were directly appointed by the government. You know, in 2017, the government went out of its way. It replaced the board chair because he was inconvenient and appointed their own person into that particular role. And that person participated in some of that conflict of interest decisions, sometimes to give even her own company some of the taxpayers' own dollars when they shouldn't have at all. So this goes on and on and on and on. And like previous members have said and others have mentioned in this House, this is not the first time that the Government of Canada, that the Liberal cabinet, is refusing to disclose documents. Winnipeg Labs, they actually took the Speaker to court to stop the release of detailed documents from the Winnipeg National Microbiology Lab. And it's gone through 2 parliamentary committees now to try to extract those documents. They even called an election to avoid having to release the documents. There was the SNC-Lavalin scandal, which the Prime Minister claimed on live television during a press conference, and there was nothing to see here and nothing was going on. And that proved to be untrue as well. There was the We Charity scandal, foreign interference campaigns. And again, in every single situation, at first the government refused to release the documents. Madam Speaker, as I often do, I have a Yiddish proverb because I feel this whole situation is like a bridge, but I want to read into the record in its original Yiddish. I'm going to practice. Sein Wort soll sein a Brick, Wort in a Moyer gehat, Arit wird Strungein. And the translation for the interpreters is, if he, the government, his word were a bridge, I'd be afraid to cross it. If we are to believe the government's argument right now, that for charter reasons, for constitutional reasons, they can't release the full documents that the Speaker has ordered released based on a majority vote in this place of all the MPs, and they're making a bridge out of it, I would not cross it. I would tell every single person in my riding of Calgary Shepherd, you cannot trust their words. If they've built that bridge out of the words of that Speaker, you cannot trust it. It is old Yiddish wisdom, and it applies right here. This all ends when they release all of the documents. It is really that simple. And then we can get back to the normal work of this House. There's actually, I believe, another point of privilege that's coming up after this involving another Randy, and other Randy, I'm told, that also has corruptly done things. And so we're also trying to figure out what is there. In anticipation of a question I am very likely to get, I do want to remind the other side of 2 times the Prime Minister has commented about criminal charges being laid, about the RCMP laying criminal charges. One is from February 2018, said that the Prime Minister said the police investigation of Vice Admiral Mark Norman will inevitably lead to, quote,
court processes. And then in another article on May 12, 2019, he said, he told reporters at a press conference that Norman's case will likely end up before the courts. That's a quote. And then he goes on in a 2018 town hall, he said that the case would inevitably lead to court processes. That's about criminal court charges in that case. They ran through the mud a senior, decorated vice chief of defense staff to suit their own goals, and now they claim to us that for reasons they can't tell the RCMP what to do when they've done it themselves, and now they can't do it. I don't believe them. Don't walk across that bridge. Give us the documents.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, you know, if the Conservative Party would stop playing the game to try to get political points and put Canadians ahead of their Conservative Party and the Canadian interests, maybe we might be able to see some progress in terms of dealing with this silliness of what we constantly hear from member after member. They continue to ignore the fact, and this is why I'm appealing to the member opposite. He'll be a wonderful presentation. Go and make it at prop. But to be able to say that as a Conservative member, you are not, or the member is not, Madam Speaker, going to listen to the advice of the Commissioner of the RCMP and the advice of the Auditor General of Canada is highly irresponsible, I would suggest, Madam Speaker. These are independent institutions. Why should Canadians believe the politically motivated games that we're seeing on the floor of the House of Commons in Ottawa, as opposed to listen to what the institutions of our RCMP and Auditor General are saying? Why does he believe he has more credibility than them on this issue?
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Shepherd.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I'd like to remind the member that he calls these organizations so independent, but it was that government that invoked the Emergencies Act that ordered police forces across Canada what to do and how to do it, removing the role of justices in issuing search warrants and warrants of any type. That's what the Emergencies Act did. They did that. When it came to the Auditor General, very early in their term, when the Auditor General asked for more money to do more audits, they refused to give the money. In fact, I remember a letter coming from a certain Liberal MP telling that they were wrong and they should keep funding that office. Those were decisions they made. They have no problems interfering in the work of officers of Parliament or the police forces when it suits their corporate interests.
Questions et commentaires, l'honorable.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. Thank you, Madam Speaker. We Charity, Arrive Can, SDTC, Mackenzie, and other consultants. There's something in common. The delegation of responsibilities to implement a support program or learning program, or for a framework for applications, for training managers, for collecting and analyzing data, collecting and analyzing and improving practices, and more. So I'm wondering, and perhaps my honorable colleague has an element of an answer for me, is a scandal because they refuse to manage and plan, and a refusal to be accountable from the government. The Honourable Member for Calgary-Shepherd. I'd like to thank the member for Beauport-Limoilou for the question, of course. I think it's the second option, the refusal to listen to the House, where the majority of members voted for these documents to be provided to the House so that they can be provided to the RCMP. It's very simple. Even the Speaker decided that yes, the government is wrong, hasn't provided all of the documents. We've all seen it. It's nothing new with this government. The sponsorship scandal was version 1, I would say, in my lifetime at least, version 1 by the Liberal Government of Canada, where corruption was normal at the time. And today it's with SDTC. Of course, I agree with the member, but in this case, I think it's the second option. It's about accountability. This government refuses to listen to the House and to Canadians.
Some comments, the Honourable Member for Edmonton-Griswold.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my honourable colleague for his intervention in his speech today. It was a really important one because I think it speaks to two things. One, the incredible support of this House to demand important documents related to financial accountability of this place. But I think New Democrats are also deeply concerned with the issue of ensuring that we have consistency across government. When we see the Conservatives in power or the Liberals in power, it seems that they both only care about financial accountability when they're opposing or trying to get more or additional political points. I have documents here, Madam Speaker, that relate to Ms. Verturen, the political appointee that the member is speaking about. She donated to the Conservatives for the last, since 2017, it's earlier, 2013, she donated thousands of dollars to the Conservative Party. Will the member reject donations from Ms. Verturen, the person who is chair, who was found in conflict of interest? Will the Conservative Party stop donations from the person that they're accusing as being a Liberal insider and, as a matter of fact, is donating to their party thousands of dollars?
The honourable member for Calgary-Shepherd.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I don't know this person, this Anna Verturen. She's definitely never donated to me. I know every single one of my donors, particularly. I would hope that the New Democrats stay on course with us. I think that is the one part where we opposition parties agree, that we are not here to defend Liberal corruption. That is the one thing that through the decades, all parties have agreed, that we are here to stand against the corruption of the Liberal Party of Canada, that we will unite together to ensure that taxpayers and Canadians get the documents, get the truth that they deserve, and that we protect them from those who wish to pick their pockets every single day.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Madam Speaker, for the last few days, I've been hearing the Liberals constantly asking to send this matter to Proc. And so I just want Canadians to know what would happen if the matter was referred to Proc based on what we've seen in the previous scandals, and that is that the NDP and the Liberals would filibuster to continue to block the production of documents. Can my honourable colleague comment on what he thinks about that?
The honourable member for Calgary-Shepherd.
I hope it never comes to having to do a filibuster anywhere at any committee. It's, as I jokingly say with colleagues, the filibuster is my favorite F word in this place. And particularly at Proc, I've actually been at Proc as a regular member, as a substitute member. I've testified before Proc as well. I hope it doesn't come to that, because in this particular case, all that a filibuster would do and delays would do at a committee would be to give more time to the Liberal Party to find a way out of its current predicament. All we're asking for is for the release of the documents, not to the Conservative Party, not to the official opposition, but to the law clerk. I think it's a very reasonable thing to ask, to release it to somebody who has no political affiliations, no past political preferences that's been expressed publicly. I've seen this done at committee before. We have demanded documents be produced, and we do it through the law clerk's office. When there are these worries from the government, from the cabinet, that it could be used directly for a partisan purpose. Sometimes there are thousands or tens of thousands of documents, and it's perfectly reasonable. And then they can be passed on to the RCMP in this particular case. And the RCMP can determine what it wants to do. All that a committee would do at this point, if the threat comes about that they would then begin delays called a filibuster, will be just to give themselves more time, potentially with an election that would then end all the procedures of the House, all the processes of the House, and would not be able to get to those documents to hand them to the RCMP, which I think is much more critical. And then the RCMP can do with it what they wish.
The honourable member for Longueuil-Charlemagne.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And as a member of the Procedure and House Affairs Committee, I'm actually very much looking forward to actually getting to the bottom of this. And we have a legislation before this House that has been stalled. And I'd ask the honourable member if we could come to an agreement and have this sent to Proc. I'm actually looking forward to studying it.
Honourable member for Calgary-Shepherd.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I'm glad that the member is here. It's another member I share something in common with. I think actually in her case, one of my alma maters is Concordia University that we share. I just moved out west right after graduation, and I think there's some time apart on our graduation year. It took me a long time to finish my bachelor's degree, I'll jokingly say. But in this particular case, there's an easy way for this to end and get to committee. Like I mentioned twice during my intervention, is she can go to any member of the government and just convince them to release all of the documents, not just the redacted pieces, but like I quoted from the Speaker's ruling, some documents were completely withheld. Just table the documents with the law clerk, everybody gets to see them, they get passed on to the RCMP, and this ends, and we can continue on with the business of the people of Canada.
A very, very brief question from the Honourable Member for Edmonton Grisba.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I spoke about this issue before. The member is accusing Ms. Verchuren, who is the person in conflict of interest who awarded her own company millions of dollars. She also happens at the same time to be donating money to the Conservative Party. How can they square the circle of the accusation that the member is making that they are a liberal partisan, when the truth is they're actually a liberal and conservative partisan? She's been donating to the party as early as 2013 and just recently the last tax year.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Shepherd.
It's simple, Madam Speaker. I don't care who you donate to. If you steal from Canadian taxpayers, you deserve to be in front of a court, and the judges can decide.
The debate, the Honourable Member for Peterborough Kawartha.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. It is always a wonderful opportunity and a true privilege to stand in the House of Commons and represent my amazing riding of Peterborough Kawartha. Okay, so here we are. Here we are, and what are we doing today in the House of Commons? You know, I often think the folks at home watching must feel like they're just watching an episode of Young and the Restless. You know, in the 3 years since I've been elected, they could turn on Parleview or CPAC, turn it off for a couple months, a year even, turn it back on, and here we are, still talking about incompetence and corruption, a lack of accountability, a lack of transparency, division in our country that has never reached this level in my lifetime of 45 years. So what's happened here in the House of Commons is Parliament has basically been brought to a halt because the Liberals are refusing to turn over documents that the Conservatives are demanding they do. Well, what are these documents and what are we talking about? It's called the Green Slush Fund. So it's based on a Sustainable Development Technology Canada, or SDTC is what you will hear the acronym used for in this. So this is a green slush fund, and what it is it's supposed to be for companies to apply to this fund. It's a $1 billion fund to invest in green technologies or green businesses. So what does that mean? Well, a whistleblower came before committee, and I think this is a really important piece of this discussion. Many bureaucrats, many people have to go to work, and maybe they're privy to some very important information. And at the end of the day, and our job is really no different, you have to put your head down on the pillow and be comfortable with your moral compass of what you're actually doing. Well, the bureaucrats underneath this fund, underneath this Prime Minister, couldn't do that any longer. And so they came forward to committee, and they are called what's called a whistleblower. And they said, there is serious corruption happening. And I'm going to read you some of the testimony that was put forward. These are quotes. I think the Auditor General's investigation was more of a cursory review. I don't think the goal and mandate of the Auditor General's office is to actually look into criminality. I'm not surprised by the fact that they haven't found anything criminal because they're not looking at intent. If their investigation was focused on intent, of course they would find the criminality. Another quote, I know the federal government, like the minister, has continued saying there was no criminal intent and nothing was found, but I think the committee would agree that they are not to be trusted on this situation. I would happily agree to whatever the findings are by the RCMP, but I would say that I wouldn't trust that there isn't any criminality unless the RCMP is given full authority to investigate. Another quote, again, if you bring in the RCMP and they do their investigation and they find something, or they don't, I think the public would be happy with that. But I don't think we should have to leave it to the current federal government or the ruling party to make those decisions. Let the public see what's there. Another quote, just as I was always confident that the Auditor General would confirm the financial mismanagement at SDTC, I remain equally confident that the RCMP will substantiate the criminal activities that occurred within this organization. So the documents we're demanding that be handed over, and the Speaker has ruled in favor of this, the opposition parties alongside of us, everyone except the Liberals have agreed to what we've asked for. These are documents that outline what has happened and what corruption has happened. This is critical. Why? Because it is your money, not you, Madam Speaker, but the people watching at home. The government doesn't have any money. It has taxpayers' money. And there should be a pretty strong understanding and agreement that whomever is in government is not abusing that money, wasting that money, or giving it to their friends and family for them to get rich and not actually doing any work. So it's a very simple ask. And you know, I want to read a couple things into the record here, but I think what I would really ask people at home to think about, this is a lot of procedural conversation about parliamentary privilege and this and that. But the question you need to ask yourself is, why do these documents exist in the first place? Why would we have a government in power that would have not just misused, but corruption, and what's the word I want to use? It's not, they have given taxpayer money to their friends and family. Why are we even having that discussion? That is the biggest question I would have. And if somebody was innocent and they're truly here to represent people and they were elected to actually ensure transparency and accountability, they would say, oh my gosh, let's hand these unredacted documents over to ensure accountability and transparency. Why did these documents exist in the first place? What are they hiding? How did we get here? How did we get to this level of corruption that hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars have gone to nothing to improve our life, in fact, make it significantly worse? That is the question that needs to be asked today. So the Auditor General of Canada found that the Prime Minister has turned the Sustainable Development Technology Canada SDTC fund into a slush fund for Liberal insiders. And in this report specifically, the Auditor General found that 58 million of 10 ineligible projects that on occasions couldn't demonstrate an environmental benefit or development of green technology. 58 million. Sounds a lot like the Arrive scam app number, doesn't it? 334 million over 186 cases to projects in which the board members had a conflict of interest. And the Auditor General didn't even do all 400. So can you imagine how many more there are? Well, let's not imagine. Let's get the documents and let's see.
Hear, hear.
The Auditor General made it clear that the blame for this scandal falls on the Prime Minister's Minister of Industry, can't say names in the House of Commons, who did not sufficiently monitor the contracts that were given to the Liberal insiders. So this is obviously very, very serious, what we're dealing with. And you know, I think it's important to go back to how did we even get here. I want to read you a quote, Madam Speaker, into the record, and I want you to guess at home, who do you think said it? Here we go. Political leadership is about raising the bar on openness and transparency. As a member of Parliament, as a leadership candidate, and now as leader of my party, I have taken every opportunity to raise the bar when it comes to openness and accountability. As leader of my party, I made raising the bar on transparency and openness my first major policy announcement so that Canadians can better hold their leaders accountable. For me, transparency isn't a slogan or a tactic, it's a way of doing business. I trust Canadians, I value their opinions, and now that I've heard them, I'm going to act. June 2013. Any guesses who said that? Any guesses? Anyone? The Prime Minister himself. Oh, how the tides have turned. And I want to read you another one, because they're just so good. They're just so good. Just going to keep going here. Get your popcorn, folks, because we're here for a while. I think we're going to have to embark on a completely different style of government. We could interpret that a lot of ways, couldn't we? He said, a government that both accepts its responsibilities to be open and transparent, but also a population that doesn't mind lifting the veil to see how sausages are made. That there is a dual responsibility in changing towards more open and transparent functioning that really will go to a deep shift in how government operates. Any guesses who said that? Anyone? Oh, same guy, Prime Minister, April 2015. Oh, another quote from April 2015. Once I looked at the trend lines in democracy, the empowering of citizens and activists, I know that the government of the future is going to be very, very different than the governments of the past. Well, it sure is different, Madam Speaker. It sure is different. Because since I've been here, it is another day, another scandal. I have never seen the country in the state that it is in. And for anyone asking, they'll say, why do you have to be so hard on the Prime Minister? Why do you have to do that? Because opposition's role is to ensure that the government is doing the best for the people of Canada. It is to bring balance to this place. That Prime Minister has shown he is incapable of balance. That Prime Minister has shown that it is rules for thee, but not for me. And I want to go through the list of scandals. Again, grab your popcorn, because there's a lot of them. The McKinsey scandal. The Auditor General of Canada report criticizes that the Prime Minister government for awarding $200 million in contracts to McKinsey without proper guidelines. 90% of contracts were awarded without clear justification, with many lacking defined purposes or outcomes. In some cases, the Canada Border Services Agencies altered requirements to allow McKinsey to qualify. 70% of contracts were sole sourced with no explanation for bypassing competitive processes. McKinsey operated without necessary security clearances in 13 out of 17 contracts. The firm's past failures include involvement in the Canada Infrastructure Bank and contributing to the opioid crisis that has killed 42,000 Canadians since 2015, Madam Speaker, in which they paid $600 million in damages. Then we have the trip to Jamaica. The MP's, the Prime Minister's $84,000 holiday vacation in Jamaica, a gift from family friends. Rules for thee, but not for me. Then we went to Montana. He went to Montana there for $228,000, not including the salaries of the RCMP officers. Okay, we're not done yet. Another trip to Jamaica in April. That one was $162,000. And who can forget a Arrive scam? I know my friend here from Brantford Branch sure doesn't forget that one, where we had to bring forward a government agency, GC Strategies. Anybody know what GC stands for? Government of Canada. $60 million that went to a company that doesn't even exist, that two guys were able to build in a weekend for under, what was it? $250,000. Taxpayer money. And you want to know why the cost of living is out of control? Madam Speaker, we do not have a revenue problem in this country. We have a prime minister with a spending and corruption problem in this country. Let's not forget about the $6,000 a night hotel room where he bust into song at the Queen's funeral. Or who could ever forget the We Charity? The Prime Minister announced We Charity would manage $912 million Canada Student Service, the $912 million Canada Student Service grant, and the Ethics Commissioner initiated an investigation on July 3rd, 2020 into that decision. But probably my most favorite scandal that stands today and really speaks to the character of what you're dealing with and the sort of rot that we've seen in this country is SNC-Lavalin. The Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner Mario Dion investigated allegations that the Prime Minister's office pressured former Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould regarding SNC-Lavalin. Raybould resigned from Cabinet and Principal Secretary Gerald Butts denied the claims before resigning. Jane Philpott also resigned in protest. In August 2019, the Commissioner found that the Trudeau and his officials had breached ethics rules. Had breached ethics rules by attempting to undermine federal prosecutors' decisions. SNC-Lavalin has been charged with fraud and corruption in connection with payments of nearly $48 million to public officials in Libya under Muammar Gaddafi's government and allegations it defrauded Libyan organization of an estimated $130 million. Two Liberal ministers, female, might I add, took the fall for that one. That's another one of these classic things. I can't wait to see who's going to take the fall for these documents, because they will be turned over, because we're not going to stop. Let's have that honest conversation. These unredacted documents, it is, can you imagine, Madam Speaker, to put this into context, if somebody from CRA phoned you and said, we think you violated tax law, we need you to hand over documents, and you said no, what would happen? What would happen? Would they just leave you and say, oh, okay, no problem? Or say you handed them over documents, but you blacked out everything that was important that they wanted to know. Would they be okay with that? Oh, so the general public has to follow every single rule that the government imposes on them while they tax them into poverty. But the government and this Prime Minister, no, not us. We're not responsible for following any rules. And you know, this mentality bleeds down into the entire front rows and benches, but not just that, into society. We have a societal blister in this country of a lack of accountability, a lack of transparency. It bleeds into our public safety when criminals have no consequences and crime is rampant because it's all over the place. And then the erosion of trust in institutions, Madam Speaker. When you erode trust, you create chaos because there is no relationship. It is the most detrimental thing you can do. And the people do not trust the government, nor should they. I'm not even done reading half of the scandals. And he's only been in power for 9 years. You know, the other important piece to talk about this is the Green Slush Fund, and in itself, what it truly is. So, give me a minute here. I gotta find a piece of paper that I'm looking for that I can't. Oh, I don't have it on me. Okay. So, we found out today, oh shoot, I'm gonna try and find it, that the PBO has now said that the carbon tax, just as Conservatives have been saying from day one, is just this big scam. It's driving up the cost of everything. Canadians are paying more out than they are getting back. And the PBO confirmed this yet again. You know, you have truckers who testify in committee that are saying they're paying $20,000 in carbon tax. What do you think is going to happen to the cost of food? Why do you think we have housing that has doubled under this Prime Minister? That is what I would like to know. Because this green, environmental friendly initiative that they stand on all the time, and they tout that they're the most environmentally friendly, they're the most environmentally conscious party, is all a facade. It's pandering. It's pandering. That carbon tax is not an environmental plan, it's a tax plan. You literally had the Minister of Mental Health stand up in this House and say that we wanted the planet to burn, only to later find out that the Minister of Environment prevented 50 firefighters, 20 fire trucks from fighting the fire in Jasper while it burned.
Shameful.
That is the gist of what we're talking about. Madam Speaker, I see you're giving me time to wrap up. Is that correct? I want to end with this. The undercurrent of all of these issues, the undercurrent of all of this is, you know, I used to worry, how are we going to make this money work? Well, I just found you $400 million. This government wastes money. We will make life more affordable for Canadians. We will restore hope, and we will make housing, food, and groceries affordable again. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, in response to this production order, the Commissioner of the RCMP wrote in a letter to MPs, "In a free and democratic society, this ensures that the government cannot direct or influence the actions of law enforcement." It's incredible that the RCMP Commissioner has to write that letter and remind MPs of what is at stake here. My family fled a communist dictatorship 40 years ago where politicians directed police to attack and go after their residents of that country. Why do the Conservatives feel so comfortable undermining the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms? That's the fundamental question that is at stake in this debate, in this House, in this day.
Member for Peterborough-Kawartha.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm curious when that member wants to freeze Canadians' bank accounts. I think that would be a great question to him when he wants to talk about violating Charter of Rights and invoking the strongest measure ever used in this House by that party when it was absolutely absurd. There wasn't a truck on that road when that Prime Minister kept that Emergencies Act in place. This is absurd. This is absurd, and everyone knows it. You know, I wanted to read what somebody wrote to me. As a Canadian this is from Erin Enns, who just wrote on my Facebook. She's watching this debate, and this is what she has to say to the Liberals and to that member opposite. As a Canadian taxpayer, what gives you, the Liberal government, the right to spend our hard-earned money on frivolous things and not feel like you should divulge where specifically it went? Where do you get off feeling like you don't work for the Canadian people, yet we pay your salary?
Here.
The Honourable Member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to repeat the question from my Liberal colleague. Does my colleague believe that there's any issue, any charter issue in this order to produce documents?
Right.
Thank you so much for that question, and I love that question because I absolutely do not think that. This is public information. The government is a public organization. These are public documents. This is public taxpayer money. There is zero reason why these documents, unredacted, should not be handed over to the Canadian people and Parliament. It makes no sense to even have that argument. I said it at the beginning of my speech.
Some comments. The Honourable Member for Edmonton, Grace Bach.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And it's the first time I've been able to debate this member since the summer, and I want to sincerely thank her for her courage and her allyship to the 2S LGBTQI community when she stood in solidarity with a very terrible and violent act of burning a pride flag in her community. And I want to just thank that member sincerely for doing that. I know how much courage that takes, and it really means a lot to me personally. I do want to, in addition to that comment, refer to an issue that I mentioned to her colleague related to conservative donations. Part of the argument that's been made over the last few days is that the Conservatives are saying that this is a Liberal insider. And as much as I agree, I'd also suggest that she's equally, Ms. Verturen, that is, who is the chair of SDTC, and she gave herself millions of dollars. Throughout her entire time as the chair of SDTC, she donated the max amounts to the Conservative Party in addition to the Liberals. And so it would be more fair to suggest that she's the Liberal and Conservative insider. Wouldn't she agree?
For Peterborough Kawartha.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you to my colleague, and thank you for the nice comments. You know what? I actually don't care who you donate to. What I care about is that taxpayer money is being used for corruption. And that is the job of this place, is to ensure that's happening. That's why we were elected. If we want to restore transparency and accountability, then we have to shine light on what's happening. And if we don't, then we can't fix it. So absolutely, let's figure this out. Let's get the documents. Let's get Parliament working again. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, the member says she doesn't care. Well, you know, it's interesting. The chairperson was an advisor to Stephen Harper, the Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, the Minister of Finance Jim Flaherty, all of which were Conservatives, and as we know, a great donor to the Conservative Party. Yet Conservative after Conservative after Conservative, dozens of them, stand up and call her a Liberal insider. It's all about the spreading of misinformation, Madam Speaker. Just like the member opposite won't answer the question directly. The RCMP and the Auditor General of Canada have said that this is in essence, that this is a game for the Conservative Party that is playing, that is dangerous because it is borderline dealing with issues that offend the Charter of Rights and due process. But the Conservatives, they just stand back and ignore it. It's irresponsible, the Conservative opposition today. Why will they not do the honourable thing and at least listen to what the RCMP and the Auditor General are saying on this political game that the Conservatives are playing?
Member for Peterborough Kawartha.
Do the honorable thing. That's pretty funny coming from that side of the House. Listen, we are not telling the RCMP to do a thing. We are telling that Liberals to hand over these unredacted documents. That is what we are doing.
Your words.
That is exactly what we are doing.
Your words.
And I will remind the member opposite that the Charter of Rights is not in place to protect the government from the people. It is in place to protect the people from the government. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Dauphin, Swan River, Nipawin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Great intervention, by the way, from my colleague. Just kind of clarify the record. The Auditor General found the SDTC awarded $58 million to 10 ineligible projects that at times could not prove an environmental benefit or development of green technology, $334 million of over 186 cases to projects in which board members held a conflict of interest, and $58 million to projects without guaranteeing that terms and conditions were met. I wonder if that, just as a review, I wonder what their people on Facebook are saying, what are constituents saying, what are Canadians saying, and how outraged are they about this findings?
The Honourable Member for Peterborough Kawartha.
You know, I want to thank my honourable colleague for that, because he has been a true warrior in the fight of exposing this massive corruption. He is incredible. If you guys want to give that, I can't say his name, Dan. You're riding.
Nipawin.
What is it? Dauphin, Swan River, Nipawin. He's an amazing member of Parliament, let me tell you. He exposed so much of this corruption day in and day out, and that's really what this is about. And I think to answer his question, you know, I just think if anybody, and I would strongly encourage my members opposite to go knock on doors, because people are genuinely exhausted. They are genuinely frustrated. They are genuinely hurting, and they have lost hope, and they have lost trust, and they want to restore hope. They want to restore affordability. And I just want to end by saying what I was trying to say earlier. I used to worry how we would fix all of this, how we would find money to invest in this. The biggest thing that hurts when you misappropriate funds, and especially in corruption, is social programming. It's social programming. And we've never seen people struggle more than they do right now. People who used to volunteer at food banks are now accessing them. And today is World Mental Awareness Day, Mental Illness Day, and I just want to take a moment to recognize everybody struggling. Hope is coming, and hope is the glue that allows you to go on when you think you can't. And restoring affordability for Canadians is the best, most powerful thing we can do as a government to ensure that people can afford their homes, their houses, and their groceries. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Edmonton Grisba.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague again for her speech. And I just want to give her an opportunity to speak directly to Canadians, actually has been doing in her speech, when they're considering voting for the Conservative Party versus the Liberal Party versus New Democrats. It's only ever our country's been governed by just the Liberals and the Conservatives. And the Conservatives have found themselves throughout the course of time in history in very similar circumstances that this government has, whether it was Mike Duffy in the during the Harper era, where we've seen fake lakes and this huge amount of money, just bags of money handed over to individuals, and then they were found they were found to be in contempt of the public spending laws. What did she say to Canadians, and have the Conservative Party learned more about financial accountability considering their past?
Very brief answer from the honourable member for Peterborough Quarter.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think the only way forward is to actually have sensible economic policies that has checks and balances in place. This green slush fund is a perfect example of money that is taken and thrown to the wind, but not only to the wind, but to people who have no right to it. It is a violation of ethics.
Order. Alors, conformément à l'article 38.
Pursuant to Standing Order 38, I would like to inform the House that the questions to be raised tonight at the time of adjournment are as follows.
Centre, infrastructure, the honourable member for Bow River, carbon pricing, the honourable member for Durham, mental health and addictions. Resuming debate, reprise du débat, the honourable member for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And just like my colleague just spoke about, and she asked the question for those watching out there today, many have heard about what is this green slush fund, and why are we here today? Well, the Liberal government is obstructing justice by refusing to turn over documents to the RCMP showing that Liberal appointed managers used the green slush fund to pay nearly $400 million to companies that they owned. And, I will say, there's so much scandal with this particular NDP Liberal government that it's hard to keep track, and you just get desensitized to it. Even we do in this place. There's so much of it. As my colleague mentioned too, she didn't even get through the full list of the scandals. But I think why you're here today is that you out there, you deserve transparency and a full investigation into this scandal. This is a big one. It's $400 million as it stands, and further investigation needs to happen. And I think what we also need to highlight is while the NDP Liberals have their carbon tax and they're bleeding money from Canadians to pay into these their carbon tax schemes, this is where the money's going. So while people are literally turning down their thermostat or buying the noodles for $1 a package at the grocery store just to survive, these guys are filling their friends' pockets with literally hundreds of millions of dollars. And I will say one additional point here. In relation to Northern BC, I was in this House, Rosa, a few weeks ago and talked about how we've just lost 2 mills in the area. And why have we lost those 2 mills? Because the costs are so exorbitant just to get timber now that some of these companies have said, look, we can't afford to do it anymore. A direct attribution to the carbon tax and its costs. So I'm going to talk about the basics, then I'm going to get into it. It's going to take some time, but I think the folks out there want a deeper dive and want to know a little bit more. So what are the basics of the scandal? At least $390 million has gone to Liberal insiders. And this is what the Liberals are trying to hide, obviously. That is why they are opposing this production order for documents to be turned over to the RCMP. Obviously, it's better to cover it up, but we've seen their examples where they do it all the time. That is why the Prime Minister's personal department, PCO,
defied the order of the House to produce these documents and ordered departments to redact all sensitive information. So, you know, and this is a delay tactic, right? Okay, we want the documents, but here I'm going to give you some black sheets of paper, and it's supposed to pacify us in this place, but we had some pretty sharp members that caught it, and we're standing up to say, sorry, won't cut it. But really, how bad is it? And this is from my colleague from South Shore St. Margaret's, who's done yeoman's work on this. This is a quote. He gave me permission to use his information. They say that a governor and council appointment, a person appointed by government entrusted to oversee taxpayer money, right, is not to personally profit from their work on a committee as a GIC appointment, government appointment, and neither is their family. And that's pretty obvious. We call it a conflict of interest in this place. We all know the rules. And man, these folks, they didn't just break the rules, but they did it in abundance. And again, what rules were set up before when we were in government, these NDP Liberals are pushing the boundaries of any limits that were set for any of us in this place. So this is what happened. In a 5-year period where there were 405 transactions approved by the Sustainable Development Technology Canada Board, the Auditor General sampled 226, so only half of them, and found that 186 of those 226 transactions were conflicted. Like, you know, it's not just one. One would be bad enough, but 186. Right? That is the 82%, and that is, again, the 330 million, as my colleague had said. So those numbers are they're massive, but they're still a little bit unclear. It gets vague when you get past the $100 million mark. Like, what does that actually mean? But let's talk about Sustainable Development Technology Canada. Was established in 2001 by the Government of Canada through the Canada Foundation for Sustainable Development Technology Act, to fund the development and demonstration of new technologies that promote sustainable development. And it did some good work. Prior to these guys forming government and some of their ministers getting involved, it was actually doing okay. SDTC is a federally funded nonprofit that is supposed to approve and disperse over $100 million in funds annually to clean technology companies. Executives awarded projects in which they held conflicts of over $330 million of funds. In 2019, former Liberal Industry Minister Navdeep Bains began appointing conflicted executive members to the board of SDTC, and I'm going to get into what some of those members have done. I'm going to keep going, though, quickly. I got lots to cover. The Prime Minister appointed boards begins voting companies in which executives hold active conflict of interest SDT funding. So what's happening is members are being put on the board that they actually know are in conflict. They're already getting money from this board, and yet they're still appointed to it. It's unbelievable. And so governance standards in the fund deteriorate rapidly under the leadership of the new chair, Annette Verschuren. The Auditor General and Ethics Commissioner initiate separate investigations after whistleblowers come forward with allegations of financial mismanagement at the fund. So, I think I want to get into some of these individuals and how, what the story is. So this is, we'll talk about Annette Verschuren, and she was the chair of the Sustainable Development Technology Canada. So she's the head of it. This is from the Globe and Mail. What's mind-boggling is the SDTC is already funding NRS TOR project in 2019 when Ms. Verschuren was appointed as chair. The Liberal government chose her to oversee an agency that had a funding contract with the company she ran. Red flag, but they still appointed her. Last week, SDTC's former Chief Executive Officer, Leah Lawrence, told a parliamentary committee that she warned an Assistant Deputy Minister at Innovation, Science and Economic Development, Andrew Noseworthy. I expressed concern there is potential for both conflict of interest and the perception of conflict of interest, Ms. Lawrence said. I expressed concern that Ms. Verschuren and the SDTC could potentially be damaged by the appointment. It just, you know, and for her to be still there as a board member is unbelievable. From, again, my colleague, South Shore St. Margaret's. They established something called accelerators, and those accelerators were outside organizations that the board hired to vet proposals to make recommendations to the board. One of those was an organization called Verschuren Center at the University of Cape Breton, in which the name of and was set up by the chair of the Green Slush Fund. There is a MARS Discovery District at U of T. Members probably know that. Can members guess who chairs MARS? It is the chair of the Green Slush Fund, Annette Verschuren. Companies would be screened through the board member control organizations, and shockingly, their companies got recommended to the board for funding. It's just pure coincidence. My colleague writes, with 82% of the transactions that they approved, 9 directors were conflicted. These directors do not represent 82% of the green technology industry in Canada, and it's a good thing to highlight. There's so many other entities and companies they could have picked, but they just happen to pick 82% that are part of this particular board. It's unbelievable. It is strangely a pure coincidence that these hand-picked directors are from the Prime Minister. And if that were not bad enough, this particular director, and this is referring to Andrée-Lise Methot, and I'll get to her in a bit, in 22 left and went to the Canada Infrastructure Bank Board. And the first thing she did was to vote $170 million of infrastructure bank money for a company owned by the chair of the Green Slush Fund, Annette Verschuren. Like, it is absolutely unbelievable. This is one, it's less money, but it's just so obvious, I have to say it. The same Annette Verschuren also sought $6 million for the Verschuren Center at Cape Breton University because it was failing. SDTC said no when it went through the process because there was a conflict. They caught it. Quote, however, in emails, it said it would help her find money from other government departments. Pretty soon after that, the Verschuren Center got $12 million from ACOA and the ISET program. And get this, her other companies got $50 million from Natural Resources Canada, and then, of course, there's the Infrastructure Bank one. So, and I just want to, this is the actual list of some of those approved, it says right in the funding approved list. And these are all the list of conflicts, so that's a government document. And these are some of the numbers that Annette Verschuren was approved in conflict. 332,500, 698,250, 98,000, 102,000, 111,000, 150,000, and it goes on. And that's just one of these members of the board that's in conflict. Next person, Stephen Kukucha, or Kukucha. I apologize to the person for mispronouncing the name, but let's move on. Again, quote from my colleague. Another director, a fellow named Stephen Kukucha from British Columbia. Stephen Kukucha was a political staffer to the former Liberal Environment Minister Anderson, and he was the organizer for the Liberal Party for the Prime Minister in British Columbia. As a reward, they put him on the green, yeah, I said Greece, maybe that's a good way to say it too, a Green Slush Fund board. Surprisingly, we have another Liberal on the board whose company he had a financial interest in. In this time on the board, the companies he had a financial interest in received almost $5 million from the very board he was serving on. Another conflict. So let's go, some examples listed here. Stephen Kukucha, 157,000. Another one, 151,000. $1,033,771. All funding approved by this absolutely corrupt board. We have more. Next member was Guy Ouimet. Quote, another board member handpicked by the Prime Minister, Guy Ouimet, has admitted in committee that $17 million of the slush fund money went to companies he has had financial interest in. He said that it is a small amount of money, 17 million. I don't know what world this guy comes from, but 17 million to, I think, most Canadians, probably 99% of Canadians, that's a lot of money. You know, he said that it is a small amount of money. It may be small amount of money to him, but it is not to most Canadians, as my colleague says. And that amount of money, he admitted, had gone up 1,000% in value since that investment was made in 2019. And it definitely pays to be a Liberal insider. And so let's just look up a few. So he has an amount in here. This is an approved conflicted list. One amount that actually says 17 million in there. There's another amount that says 157,000. There's another one for 151,000. Another one, you know, it's just unbelievable. It just keeps going, and it's just endless. So we'll move on. This is the last one. This is the one with direct ties to the current radical environment minister. So this particular board member's name is Andre Lise Methot. And again, quote, one director was particularly aggressive. She was appointed in 2016 by the Prime Minister. Her name is Andre Lise Methot. She runs a venture capital firm called Cycle Capital, and that name will come up again, in green technologies. Andre Lise Methot's companies before and during her time on the board, I'm going to pause for effect here, received $250 million in grants from the SDTC. $250 million, folks. While she was on the board, $114 million went to green companies that she had invested in herself. I'll go through because I know I'm running out of time. So I already made reference that the connection from this person on the board to this current radical environment minister, you know, the same environment minister that's causing mills to close in my riding, that's limiting oil and gas development in my riding, that's limiting mining investment in the Northwest Territories, Yukon, and Nunavut. All that same radical minister is having an effect. He's wanting you to pay. And why is he making you pay carbon tax wise? So he can get more money, so he can get the money and give it to his friends. So again, quote, her in-house paid lobbyist for 10 years before he was elected was the current radical Minister of the Environment. While he was lobbying for Cycle Capital, the current radical Minister of the Environment got $111 million. That's what he went to work for. That's what he made money for this company. He brought that kind of money in before he was minister. The radical Minister of the Environment, Minister Guilbeault, in this time as lobbyist for Cycle Capital, when he lobbied 25 times in the last year before entering the House, the PMO and the industry department gave over $100 million in green slush money to Cycle Capital. And I think what's even more shocking is, you know, the minister's in the House right now, right? But he still owns those shares in that particular company. The question is, we're not sure what the value of those shares is. He hasn't declared that. And that's, again, what some of these documents will disclose, and we'll hopefully find out how much that actually is. I'll read on. Even though, as Cabinet Minister of Government, he participated in discussions that gave the Green Slush Fund another $750 million. So this is as Cabinet Minister. He's given the same group to spend because he knows, hey, I guess we can help out our friends by dumping money into this thing. So he funds the fund with another $750 million, of which over a quarter has gone to that company. So a company he's got direct ties to, has shares in, he's given money, and it's hard to argue that it's not going over there. But anyway, we hope the documents will be forthcoming and we can actually see it. He still owns shares in it. He has not disclosed what they are worth. I know he is familiar with, well, I won't maybe say that, but let's say this. The member has previous experience wearing an orange jumpsuit. That was the reference made by my colleague. But again, I think what bothered me the most when I saw some of these numbers, you know, and we're the ones who go up to northern communities. I face it every time I go back to my riding in Fort St. John, and you know, folks are dealing with, you know, use an example. We just carbon tax bill for somebody in Fort Nelson for a 1,500 square foot mobile home is over $500 just for gas. This is in spring, by the way. Over half of that is pure carbon tax. So here's the person trying to stay warm in the north in a mobile home, probably can't afford much, and this radical minister is saying, no, you guys can afford to pay a little bit more. But it would be one thing if it was actually going for a good cause and good reason, right? But now we're seeing evidence that it's going to just line his liberal friends' pockets. And I think that's even more of a travesty in what's happening here. And we've used it as, maybe some would call it a slogan, but people are genuinely struggling to feed themselves, to stay warm, and to house themselves. Some of these homeless encampments are people that just can't afford to live in an apartment anymore. They have nowhere else to go. They ran out of money, or they've lost their job in the natural resource sector for some reason, again, because of the radical minister's policies. But I'm just going to conclude. How many minutes do I have, Madam Speaker? 2. Be quick then. Okay, so what do we know as in conclusion? We know the Auditor General of Canada found that the Prime Minister has turned Sustainable Development Technology Canada into a slush fund for Liberal insiders. A recording of a senior civil servant slammed the outright incompetence of the Trudeau government, which gave $390 million worth of contracts. Oh, sorry.
A member knows we cannot use names, and I'd like the honourable member to actually retract the use of those names. Thank you.
A recording of the senior civil servant slammed the outright incompetence of the Prime Minister's or the NDP Liberal government, which gave $390 million worth of contracts inappropriately. The Auditor General found the SCTC gave $58 million to 10 ineligible projects that on occasion couldn't demonstrate an environmental benefit or development of green technology. $334 million over 186 cases to projects in which board members held a conflict of interest. Another $58 million to projects without ensuring contribution agreement terms were met. The Auditor General made it clear that the blame for this scandal falls on the Prime Minister and the Industry Minister, and I would also argue the current Environment Minister, who did not sufficiently monitor the contracts that were given to Liberal insiders. Again, while this radical Environment Minister punishes you, he lines his friends, his NDP Liberal friends' pockets. While the minister shuts down forestry with his radical 30 by 30 closures in BC, Quebec, and across the country, his friends are pocketing millions. While the minister shuts down responsible oil and gas development that keeps our northern communities going, keeps us warm in winter, he helps his friends pocket hundreds of millions of dollars. And this is a finishing quote from my friend from South Shore, St. Margaret's. This is corruption like we have never seen in Canada. This is why we have asked for the documents. Because the Liberals are hiding documents, this is why we are resisting and hiding the documents, because they know there's more corruption with their hand-picked directors. If we were a private sector institution, we would be turning those documents over to the police to investigate. That is their job. No, it is not just the job of the police to go to the courts to seek that. It is our job to...
And we have to go for questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. At times it's fairly pathetic in terms of how it is Conservatives will manipulate their speeches to be able to take the character assassination to the degree in which the member has done in his speech. Even the question I had asked previously was in regards to the chair of the organization we're talking about. She was a political advisor to Stephen Harper, to Brian Mulroney, to Jim Flaherty. She's a great donor to the Conservative Party of Canada, thousands and thousands of dollars. And yet the Conservatives continue, member after member, stand up and say Liberal friendly. Their game is more about character assassination and trying to make politics as ugly as possible so that they can feed that far right, Madam Speaker. It's sad to see. The reality is the government saw actions that were taken that were inappropriate and has taken actions to ensure that the taxpayers and Canadians get justice. My question to the member, when will the Conservative Party start stopping this disgusting game that they're playing and allow for us to get down to business, put Canadians ahead of their political interests?
Honourable Member for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
I always get a kick out of this member accusing others of character assassinations, then goes on to do that exact thing himself and gaslight Canadians. The bottom line is they need to produce the documents. They produce the documents unredacted. This all goes away. Thanks.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Toronto, St. Paul's.
Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleague from Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies. I'm new in this place, but I wasn't born yesterday. $400 million. That's like 3,000 Teslas, 26,000 Maple Leafs tickets, just putting this into perspective, or 360 homes in Toronto. Okay? It's plain to see what's going on here. There are bad things done with the money of Canadians, and they're being hidden. The examples you gave me are akin to insider trading, and that's the world I come from.
Any examples to anyone? So through the chair, please.
Of course, of course. The examples that the member gave are akin to insider trading, and that's where I was trained. And where I was trained, that's a criminal offense. And that's what's going on here, to my view. I'm dumbfounded at the lack of transparency, which would clear this whole thing up in about 35 seconds. If we're talking about efficiency, I'm an engineer. That's what I'd love to see, is efficiency. If the other side of the House will produce the documents, we're done. My question, from my colleague from Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies, is: are Canadians to believe that are we to believe the government that they're actually protecting Canadians' rights?
The Honourable Member for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Yeah, thank you for that great question, my new colleague from Toronto. I guess we all remember the campaign of 2015, Sunnyways, right? I even had sunglasses made with Sunnyways on the side of it because we all knew it was a clever slogan, but we knew Sunnyways didn't last very long in this government, and it was supposed to be, shine a light on things and open and accountable government. Well, that went away pretty quick, and and some of the language they might have been using, maybe they actually were secretly saying, yeah, we're going to be doing this new things in a new way. Well, if this is the new way that they were promising Canadians, my goodness, I don't think Canadians were expecting this. I think of the person that's struggling, that person, Xander from Fort Nelson, with his carbon tax bill that he sent me that's over $200 and some to try to stay warm in Fort Nelson in his mobile home. He's giving money because of this radical environment minister wants him to give more, and this is even going to quadruple. It's going to get higher, right? And it's all only to do this, is to fund his NDP Liberal buddies and fill their pockets, and it's an absolute shame.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, and we talk about struggle. 300,000 factories, 300,000 Canadians lost their jobs under the Conservative government. 300,000 manufacturing jobs lost under the previous Conservative government. And I remember that because factories were closed, businesses were closed in my community. Those were terrible, terrible times. Under this Liberal government, we've delivered a battery plant to Windsor, 2,500 good-paying local Canadian jobs. Why hasn't the Conservative opposition supported this battery plant in Windsor, supported the 2,500 jobs in my community, and supported Windsor workers? Why haven't they stood up and supported those workers in my hometown?
The Honourable Member for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Well, I think there's a bit of a discrepancy with what the member just said. Back when we were in government, I was part of the 2011 to 2015 government, and we had some pretty good economic things going on in this country. We had natural resources in my own riding I'll speak to. Natural gas was getting developed. Forestry was going. We had a soft lumber agreement within the first 80 days. Instead, contrast that with this particular government, where they have to spend your taxpayer money in the billions to buy a battery plant. Instead of letting the market just respond and let it build itself, they have to literally spend billions and billions and billions of dollars of your money to build this thing. And that's not the way this country started, and it's not the way we're going to survive. We're 1.4 trillion in debt, and it's just getting worse under this government, and they're throwing money at everything. and hoping something works, but it's not working.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Churchill, Quebec-Newcastle.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I want to highlight, I mean, the member talked about workers in his part of the country facing difficult times. It takes me back to a few years when my home community was going through difficult times as a result of what the agreement that Stephen Harper approved, the Harper government approved, allowing Vale, a multinational, to buy out Inco, and then who went on to slash all of the value-added jobs at the mine site in my hometown of Thompson. And unfortunately, all we had was platitudes from the Stephen Harper government and no real action to back up resource workers and ensure value-added capacity in my hometown. So I'd like to hear the member's thoughts on why the Conservative government didn't stand up for workers at that time, and is that sort of that concern for resource workers in northern provinces, is it just reserved for the Liberals? Let's not forget our history, including the history of my hometown in Thompson.
Honourable Member for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Yeah, well, I can just speak to what happened in my riding when we were in government, and we saw different projects that when we came and formed a majority, we saw projects that were on hold, money wasn't being spent, that the gears of the economy started turning again. And that was because of the leadership of Stephen Harper. I mentioned before, we haven't talked about forestry a whole lot today, but within the first 80 days, we had a softwood lumber agreement done. Guess what? After 9 years, these guys, NDP Liberals, haven't even gotten an agreement done. And I actually caught the minister at previous negotiations and meetings she had with her U.S. counterparts. I asked, what was softwood even on the agenda? Wasn't even on the agenda for the last 6 years. So we got it done. We were in government. First 80 days, it provided surety. We had a lot of development in forestry across the country at that time. I hope we get back there once again, where we see manufacturing come back to Canada, where we see our natural resources developed in Canada, and bring back the country that was the prosperous one we once knew and loved.
Questions et commentaires? Questions? The Honourable Member for Edmonton, Grisba.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And since we're on the topic now of natural resources and the work that the Conservatives have done to really damage the natural resource sector, I was in Alberta working in the natural resource sector in the northeast part of the province in the Cold Lake oil sands when I got laid off from that because the Conservatives had sold off Canadian Natural Resources Limited. Stephen Harper sold it off to a state-owned enterprise known as Nexen, the Chinese state-owned natural resource company. Owns CNRL. Where was that member, and where is he today when it comes to the state ownership of CNRL by China that him and his party sold off?
The Honourable Member for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies, 15 seconds.
I think maybe the members, misremembering, because the government never did ever own CNRL.